Hello everyone and welcome to our 6th session of our conference, which is called Postpedagogical Imagination. Our first speaker is Kay Sidebottom from the University of Stirling. Kay.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Olga. Lovely to be here, really enjoying the conference so far. It's been fantastic. So, yeah, I'm going to just start off by saying a little bit about the context that I'm coming from and my background and why I'm interested in this particular topic. Do feel free, Olga, if I run over. I pack too much in, so shut me up, it's fine. I'll try to keep to time, I'll do my best. So I'm a lecturer in education, as it says here, at University of Stirling in Scotland. And my background in terms of posthumanism, I work a lot with school teachers and teachers who work in further education. And I think the main driver for my work really has been to bring posthuman ideas back to the front line. So how can we work with these philosophies when we're actually out there doing the job day to day? And I think posthumanism, we've talked a lot about philosophical concepts and theories, can be quite hard for anybody to get their head around, particularly if you're a school teacher and you're working long hours and you don't have time to read this kind of work. So when I first engaged with Braidotti and her summer school back in 2015, my key question was, how do I bring these ideas home so that people can put them to work for real resistance and for insight in their daily practice? One of the things I was particularly interested in recently was how educators are educating about climate change. So obviously a key issue. And in English schools, we have very much a sustainability agenda which centres around economic growth and acceleration. And the curriculum in England is very much knowledge-based. So it's about the accumulation, how much knowledge can we pack into the heads of children, rather than emphasising a turn to affect or emotion. So that's the context. So our current predicament really calls for a different kind of curriculum, one that encourages notions of kinship, the kinds of things we've been talking about earlier today, that accepts complexity and reframes our attachment to a shared world, the shared world we live in. And I believe that posthumanism offers that effective turn towards the kind of social justice that accounts for difference, enacted through defamiliarisation from the dominant visions that we have of education. So I've heard from Carol and others about the processes of noticing, of responsibility, affirmative ethics. So my presentation tells the story of a recent research project called More Than Human Teachers, which had artistic provocations and fabulations aiming to inspire teachers to begin those processes of noticing, decentering the human in order to enact posthuman ideas in their own classrooms, essentially. So the quote here from Robin Wall-Kimmerer, I think, speaks to the question that I wanted to explore. How do we expand, transform typical sustainability education that continues to prioritise growth for a world that somehow seems to be made for us? Let's see if this works. Yeah. So I'm going to briefly, I won't talk too much about posthumanism because I think we're all familiar with that already, but I'm going to say a little bit more about the More Than Teachers, Human Teachers project, and how teachers can possibly help to repair this kind of great separation that's been brought about by ideas of human exceptionalism. Indigenous epistemologies formed a really key part of the project, and I'm always very careful when I talk about that in terms of appropriation. In England, obviously, I won't go into the whole history, but indigeneity, very kind of contested idea. How does that fit with us? How can we put it to work without somehow recolonising ideas and principles? But saying that, I've worked with some Indigenous scholars to say, actually, there are ways that we can see this through a kind of two-eyed seeing, I think is the term that's often used. And I really wanted to explore this with the educators I worked with, but thinking very much about their own locations, their own connections to the land, their own folk histories, their traditions, their stories, and what that means in an English context. And I'd be interested to know how people feel about that, whether they still feel I'm appropriating in some way, because it's something that I struggle with very much. So this idea of ethical humility, how can we enact this without continuing to steal, essentially? So one of the first provocations that I put to the teachers was around this notion of affects. And I think when I talk to teachers about some post-human ideas, they just accuse me of being off the wall, what you're talking about, you know? But then I ask them questions like this, and they can all relate to these things. Have you ever walked into the room and sensed the atmosphere? Have you been affected by your teaching, by smell, temperature, colour, sound and light? We've been talking about these things, haven't we? The materiality of the environment, the way the furniture's laid out. Have you learned something important through your relationships with non-humans in some way, with animals? And people always have many stories to tell about that. So everybody kind of gets it. So the first thing we did together was to think through some of these ideas and start a slight shift in our kind of educational paradigm. So affect, this is according to Anna Hickey-Moody, is, quote, the virtuality and materiality of the increase or decrease affected in a body's power of acting. And it manifests through these kind of social relations, but also through human and non-human interactions. So while the idea that humans are affected by their environment, the energies of others, or even the objects or decor of a room is often acknowledged in conversations about teaching, so teachers often complain, you know, about having to move furniture around, all of that. But no one ever seems to do much with that knowledge. It's there, but it's not really acted upon. So the transmission of affect is therefore, as Brennan suggests, a conceptual oddity. It's a phenomenon that doesn't fit in a world where education is individualised, where knowledge is measured by cognitive load on the brain, and the body's overlooked, unless it's being naughty, it's unruly, or it doesn't fit in some way. But nevertheless, teaching decisions are made every day that relate in some way to atmosphere and the role of non-humans in its creation. So these were the provocations. And just very briefly, just to say a few things about my take on posthumanism and how I brought these ideas to the teachers. Again, Natasha will like this, imagery really helps. I often talk about Vitruvian Man, so this is one of Braidotti's frames that she uses a lot. And this idea that, you know, most of us aren't that kind of human. You know, that's the one that's been held up in terms of the man of reason, rational man, human exceptionalism, all of those kind of things. But we don't tend, some of us maybe, but most of us don't have that perfection as it was drawn. So it's very much a critical post-human stance that I take. And I think very much this post-anthropocentric element of critical post-humanism was the key thing that was important for this project. So I was very keen for the educators to begin to decenter the human, think about the elevation of other species, so man not dominating the world, the circle that goes outside Vitruvian Man, and thinking about how we can elevate other species, ecological systems, which have always been relegated in a very exploitative, limiting hierarchy. So the convergence of ideas going beyond the human, but also thinking about being post-anthropocentric was really key. So educating about a world that isn't for us, but one that elevates animals, plants, the wider ecosystems on which we rely, feels to me a vital shift in terms of times of ecological destruction. Jason Wallin uses the term the filthy lesson of symbiosis, and this idea that Earth becomes Gaia, the self-regulating organism within species are interconnected, interdependent. So much education, I think, in England, certainly at the moment, continues to centre humans, as I've said. So the environment is at the service of us, and this continues to play into neoliberal ideals. So even though, for example, we're just introducing in England at the moment a new GCSE qualification in natural history, which you think that's brilliant, who doesn't want to do that, what a great idea. It's still a qualification, it's still assessed, it's still about knowledge accumulation at the end of the day. So thinking about this switch to notions of kinship and kind of other interactions with non-human animals, others, accepts complexity and starts to reframe our attachment to a shared world. I'm just going to briefly mention the pandemic, because that was very much at the backdrop of all of this. And it revealed, I think, very much that the nature-culture split, or the great separation that Indigenous scholar Daniel Wildcat uses that term, is really a fiction. And it took very little, I think, to break down the divisions between inside and outside and to blur the boundaries. Schools in England were treated as kind of almost like hermetically sealed units. You know, the government said, you won't get COVID here. And of course, we know that that was a nonsense, you know, tragically for many. Actually, they were the places of most contagion. And we had all of these kind of interesting things going on. We had goats appearing in Welsh gardens, and we had sheep in the playgrounds. A goose made a nest in the centre of York railway station. So there was all kinds of interesting things going on. And I think most of us probably got that sense for a moment of perhaps opportunity to reframe this, which I think, sadly, for this rush to normality, has kind of passed and overcoded that. So I think that was part of the backdrop to the project and the things that I was thinking about. And I think the other thing I just wanted to say briefly on that was, you know, there's issues, particularly when we think about taking people and reconnecting with nature and the outside world, about who is able to do that. There's issues around who can be mobile, who can have access to space. Access to outdoor spaces was a massive issue for many people during lockdown in particular. And it reveals very much, I think, about inequalities. So what I didn't want to do with my project was to take people away somewhere to some beautiful landscape and then think, well, actually, how does that work in my urban setting, you know, when I go back? So it wasn't about kind of some utopic idea of let's go and be free and be with nature. It was very much about trying to root it and centre it in whatever situation people found themselves in. So decentering the human then, this ecotistical worldview from this diagram here kind of talks about how to decenter man, essentially. So it starts to balance what's normally seen as a pyramid with humans at the top of the tree to kind of equality of species, but also of humans. So we've got post-human and post-anthropocentrism going on there. And the quote here, I think, very much thinking about this idea that anything other than human is less than and excluded from the centre, was really problematic and something that we wanted to get together and really start to challenge. So with the project I mentioned at the start, very much interested. I've spent quite a few years working with some Indigenous scholars from various places. And when I say Indigenous, of course, there's no one notion of indigeneity. That's, again, really important to say. Multiplicities of states, contexts, you know, through connections with land and the nature of land on which people are situated. And Zoe Todd reminds us, again, many ideas that we take from Indigenous ontologies, epistemologies, are not new. They've been enacted and inscribed as part of these cosmologies for centuries. So while some notions of posthumanism, I think, can be seen to continue the colonial erasure of Indigenous thought and practice, a posthumanism with an ethics of relational reciprocity calls us to account for this and augment the voices. So that was something that I was very, very keen on doing. So avoiding this co-opting of traditional worldly knowings as new discoveries or novel contributions to knowledge means obviously deliberately including Indigenous scholars in work, citing, and so on. So again, that was something that was very much part of the project. I worked with a Métis scholar in Canada, and we started to think through what it might mean, as I say, in terms of our own localised stories, histories, and our connections with the land. So the research project, these were the two key questions that we wanted to look at. So this was myself and a group of teachers from all kinds of different contexts. There was about 20 of us that got together. Some worked in schools, some worked in community education, some worked in further and higher education. And It was a participatory project, so these were the questions that we came up with together. The first was, what can teachers learn from more than human educators, such as water, plants and animals? And the second was, how can we use these pedagogies and think about different pedagogies that helps teachers shift from an anthropocentric worldview to more of an animist one, and what might that mean in their day-to-day practice? So the teachers I was with taught all sorts of different subjects. They weren't particularly focusing on climate and sustainability in their teaching, but it was thinking about how they might bring these things across their whole curriculum, basically, in an interdisciplinary sense. So we went here. This is a place in the Yorkshire Dales. And the moss was really important to us, actually. During the weekend, it kept cropping up as a more than human educator. And we spent the weekend, as I say, doing some artistic practice. What we actually started with was poetry. And again, interdisciplinarity, really important to me. And we opened the weekend with this poem by Le Guin. And I won't read it out now, it's a beautiful poem, but I think this idea of being present, of reframing, I think, our relations was really, really key. And that just helped to get people into a bit of a creative space and start to think about perhaps how they might relate differently over the course of the weekend. So we wanted to shift, I think, our ideas of subjectivity. And so over the 3 days that we were there, we did a lot of walking. A lot of it was unfacilitated, so I didn't want to kind of reify my teacher role. You know, it was unfacilitated, let's walk. We did some art brut, so kind of very, informal art-based practice. We did some mycology, so we were very interested in mushrooms, and we had someone who was really into that, so we looked at mushrooms. And we wrote poetry, so we did all kinds of different things. One of the key things that we did during our walks was to work with Wal Kimmerer's idea of naming, and to think about how when we are outside, we very often categorise nature. So what's this plant? Oh, that tree's interesting. What is it? Where's this leaf from? So we wanted to move away from that categorising to think about relations. So, for example, and one of the indigenous languages uses the word ancestor for tree. So we said, okay, what if we see trees and we refer to them as ancestors rather than that's an oak tree or something like that? What does that do for us in terms of our understanding? 5 minutes, perfect. So we did that, and that was a really interesting process as we walked around, thinking very differently about what we saw. So the other thing I was really interested in terms of kind of researching this was ethics. And I wanted to expand our notion of ethics from the usual idea that humans fill in ethics forms and we just think about the human in the ethical process, to the fact that we were doing interviews and having conversations while we were walking, and we were, naturally influenced by the wind or by the sound of the water. So we added in, kind of as participants, some of those naturalised phenomena. So that was really interesting, challenging to fill in the ethics form when you're putting that in there. So what can we learn from more than human teachers? So very much about thinking about things like this, about mushrooms and rhizomes and interconnections and the way that trees relate and animals relate. We didn't see elephants. I just really like that photograph. But these three things, these were the kind of things that we were sort of exploring and thinking, what can we learn? What happens if we see these things as teachers, not just human beings as teachers? One thing that's really interesting, I think, during the weekend was that when we talked about the teachers that we'd come across on our weekend, it wasn't just, as I'd kind of predicted, the kind of natural ones, the wind, the moss, all of that. It was also things like benches. It was material things. And so I think that expanded my thinking a little bit, because of course you're very much bound up, as much as you don't want to in a participatory project. You naturally have your own ideas about how it might unfold. But yes, so the material was really significant. And I think somebody perhaps mentions it in here. one of the participants wrote a lot about his relations with the bench that he sat on during the course of the weekend and what that process taught him. So in terms of kind of findings, again, I didn't particularly want it to be a project with lots of outcomes, but you can have a look at some of these quotes for yourselves. And I think the key thing was very much about noticing. It was about paying attention in different ways, what that does to us. But something else really interesting that came out, and I hadn't anticipated, was about human relations with each other. So when I thought about let's go and descend to the human and, you know, have all these experiences, what can we learn from water and rocks and all of those things? One of the key things that was important to the participants was about the way they related with each other. And so kinship, I think, for me, became very expansive, and I hadn't really thought how important it was to become human differently. That's one of the things that people said. It was also about relating differently to each other. Something very important about naming came out, challenging binaristic language, dualism, creating new concepts and possibly new words to give words to this. But also being critical. So we're in the Yorkshire Dales, which is quite a problematic landscape, actually, overgrazed. It's not the kind of environment we would have seen hundreds of years ago covered in trees. It's very boundaried. There's very little right to roam, actually. So it's also about being not just, as I say, this utopic idea, but being critical and aware of what landscapes we're in and the histories of those. So there was criticality in there. And then also a lot around temporality. How can we teach when, you know, we're very much needing to push back about acceleration, and the way that we're learning and the way that we're changing in our teaching is something that's going to emerge. It's not going to be linear. It's going to cycle, and it's going to be different. One of the participants, and I'll finish on this point, saw the weekend, interestingly, as a disruption. So it was this idea that, okay, we're not going away and then just coming back to normal. We're going to do something differently. But actually, it's also okay to go away at times and to be in a different space. So he talked about it being the grit in the machine. It's the thing that disrupts the line of flight, to use the Deleuzian term, to take a line of flight and then to go back. So we're still talking about this project. We did the weekend in April. Participants are still saying, this is happening for me. This is now changing for me. I'm back in my class now, and this is what I'm doing differently. So loads of books inspired this, and I've got lots of references, lots of reading. Do get in touch. That's my old email address, but it still works. I think you've probably got my new one as well if you need it. Happy to share more information about it and the things that I found out along the way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate, for this moving talk. Now, our next two speakers are Mikhail Bukhtoyarov and Anna Bukhtoyarova. They are from the Siberian Federal University. Just you can sit here.
Probably we can. Because one mic is not working, I'm probably going to stand and he's going to sit. So
As you wish.
I'm going to be a visual part.
Just
Because you have a special.
just make sure to speak in the mic.
Okay.
Is it? I don't know. I think
Probably you can use the second microphone that is over there, or
but it's
This one works.
this one works. Yeah. Thank you.
and
Oh, right.
I have this device.
Okay, yeah. The power
Okay,
thing.
let's.
Milan, is it okay? Can we start? Let's start.
This is our first slide, and we are really happy to present here. We are really happy to have you as an audience, and
Let's start. So, yeah, we present.
let me change the slide to the second one, which
it?
this is testing. Yeah, yeah, it works.
Okay, so let us start with giving some of the background to you. So this is Mikhail, or Mike for short. So he has his most background is in social philosophy. He has PhD in it, but he also has a master's in instructional technology background, like strong background in philology, English, German. Well, he works for philosophy department, law school, and also, like me, for the Institute of Continuing Education. So he's pretty diverse, I would say.
Well, actually, my German is really bad, so I wouldn't say that philology is my strong point. This is Anna. Anna has master's degree in library information science, and we collaborate on instructional technology. Her skills are really helpful. She is also in civil law, specialist degree, and in history. She has background in history and teaching English. Currently, she is employed by an IT company, so her academic background also has extension in the technological field, and this is really precious. Well, this explanation.
Yeah, actually, this is maybe helpful for you to understand or about what is following.
But I just wanted to mention that actually we have the machine here, and that background probably explains why the third co-author is the machine, not this type of machine. This picture is from one of my courses for computer science major students who really have to deal with humanities sometimes, and they have a course in philosophy, introduction to philosophy. So this is working. Let me start with the very basic definition.
Yeah, actually, when we were discussing the term educational machine, we discovered that it is used in different contexts, and there's no like one, I would say, one definition for that.
Yeah, there are multiple meanings, but when we were constructing this definition, we were relying on the concept from Georgy Shchedrovitsky, who is a philosopher in Russia, who was a philosopher, and he died in the 1990s. He tried to present the whole society as a mega machine that utilizes humans, that utilizes resources well, and his concept later was developed into a management concept and was aligned with the ideas of the fourth industrial revolution.
Yeah,
so basically it's
effective managers in our country love this concept.
And why educational machine? When we are talking about educational system that exists because and while it demonstrates learning progress of humans, of course, how this machine functions, what is this machine constructed of? Well, this is purely engineering questions. But we also can use some engineering approach to understand what glitches, what interruptions, what problems this machine can have. And here goes the approach from computer security. Because cybersecurity. You see that some advanced cybersecurity guys, they say that the biggest breach in any system is the human. Human being is the only thing that cannot be improved. It cannot be substituted. And any system, technical system that implies human actor can be broken. That's why they have to deal with scenarios. And professionals in computer science, they work with scenarios just to understand what can happen. Of course, these scenarios can be sometimes really from science fiction stories. But also, these scenarios can be really short and simple to understand what the problem is. We decided to go this path, to follow this path to understand how those who think in zero ones, it's here, though I covered it with my, my jacket, how those who construct such scenarios can think about education.
Of course, it's not all the scenarios that can happen. There's just some examples for you.
And here we also utilize one more concept from philosophy, which is thought experiments. Because thought experiments help us think about future, about possibility of something happening. And first, we decided to have three.
So this is the first scenario. So we called it sick machine. Imagine that one day we deal with a computer virus that converts a randomly selected grade for any past, present, or future assignment of every student in the world to A+ or F. Everywhere on the planet, yeah. Once in 24 hours at midnight.
Right. Imagine, yeah.
Randomly.
Would that be an expected outcome of the educational process, educational whatever?
And how the possibility of that would change our perspective, you know, our vision of that?
Well, actually, this scenario is based on the fundamental problem of the educational machine, of its fundamental on its foundations, the deterministic approach that is embedded into the system. If something happens, then there should be this or this. And imagine that a complex educational machine, really complex, with multiple elements and connections, well, it behaves in chaotic way. I mean mathematical understanding of chaos that is from Melanie Mitchell and Santa Fe Institute, where chaos is the sensitive dependence on initial conditions. Okay, but this machine has objective. It tries to remain on the track and perform its function. But when the machine is broken, like in our case, when the machine is hacked or is just broken, it does not follow this objective, and it becomes stochastic. It changes the whole paradigm of the machine, and humans cannot deal with that. So it becomes really something out of our rationality. And will it be a post-human agent? One more scenario.
Yes, another scenario is generous machine. So imagine one day all grades for all past and present assignments in all schools and universities, the university databases are now A+. All of them.
Probably that's the end of education as we know it, yeah? When all the registers system have A+. Why? Who needs education then? Well, in terms of machine, of course. It reached its goal. And this is one more fundamental problem which is widely discussed in machine learning and among professionals in artificial intelligence. It's actually related to alignment problem. When the machine performs towards some objective which is misunderstood. Because human language and human ability to construct objectives is something different from what machine gets. And there are different outcomes here. The machine can simulate growth, or the machine can stimulate growth. So the machine can just collect data and be okay with that, or it can be do all three things together. And why is it utility maximizer? This term comes from economy, because when, for example, a company is doing something on the market, its real goal, its real objective is not to satisfy the customer, it's the profit. And the machine also, it just collects something that is important, that is prescribed by the program. For example, 01, 01, 01. So utility maximizer is where we just misalign our goals with the goals of the machine.
Okay, and the third scenario that we came up with is chicken farm. So imagine one day the students in the classroom have a strange form of amnesia all at once. They instantly forget who they are, but they know all the answers to all the tests in the course. Cite any reading assignments, ask and answer complex questions, and capable of carrying out excellent project or providing significant input to a discussion, but they don't remember who they are.
Well, again, if you see 1010, we are not following that that order 1, 2, 3. Why? Why should we? We are not machines. I call it not a bug, because the phrase at the very end, it's not a bug, it's a feature. The guys from Silicon Valley love it, because whatever is the problem, it's a feature of the system. Why it's important? Because the machine is trying to produce rationality in humans while teaching them, while pushing them towards more and more learning. It's a kind of, again, misalignment, but in a slightly weird way, when we have rationality multiplied and multiplied by the machine. So it reproduces itself. And this bias, it's intrinsic part of the construction. We cannot avoid it because the machine is based on 0-1s. And, well, it's not our teacher. It's not caring. It's not doing something that humans do even when they don't think about that. It's just reproducing itself. Well, very simple, childish question. Why? Why do we have that? What is fundamentally wrong with the machine? And one more term from those guys who are doing digital transformation, strategic planning, and the digital officers, they are called, as far as I remember, from information science and management. So, well, this is digital twin. Probably you've heard this. You've heard this term, and it's a kind of model, but not simply a model. It's a model and the data merged together, because the more precise model is, the more data it requires. So it's like the eternal loop. The model is more precise, it requires more data, storing more data, obtaining more data, and it goes in iterative cycle, making digital twin more complex, requiring more computational power, and empowering the machine. Digital twin?
Yeah. For what? Why? Why do we need that? Why? Well, the initial idea, of course, good. Because we need to, extend, the idea is to extend our capabilities with augmentation. So the good things that we hear is personalization of educational path based on prescriptive analysis, personalization of interfaces and content, multimodality, enhanced learning, biohacking again to enhance learning, distance learning and collaboration. More cookies?
Augmentation is meant to be something good in this picture. Augmentation is something that allows learner feel better, be more productive, but
and more
again,
satisfied.
Again, of course, it's a capitalist approach, which is about that utility function, maximizing it. But here is what we've figured out. This system, it creates a positive feedback from purely cybernetical point of view. It makes the reductionist approach ubiquitous, because this digital twin, it's never complete. It's a model, and the machine is dealing with the digital twin, not with the human, not with the actions of the human, not with the results of the human activity, but only with those numbers that it drives, that it gets from these activities. And this is huge. This is huge problem from the point of view of dehumanization. The ontology of the machine is dehumanizing. It's based on assessment, on modeling, and it wants more assessment and modeling. So it's like fractal structure. Assessment inside assessment inside assessment. Model inside model inside model. Well, and it recognizes only active humans. Yesterday we were discussing that. In the classroom or outside the classroom, it takes only the data that are good for the machine,
well,
that are suitable for the machine.
At least for now, it cannot read your thoughts, so it doesn't know. It doesn't know what if you are learning, if you are not doing anything. So this is what it's set up to do.
This is from Digital Humanities. 2 minutes. Humanization, blue one. Dehumanization.
Yeah, this is the
red one.
Quantitative analysis of their word frequency in books.
And it's really interesting when you see how they interchange and cross. Somewhere around 1960s, somewhere around 1980s, when the key technologies were developed. And this is how the machine sees the humanization of education.
Yeah, this image was produced
with a neural network, of course. It's how they see us. We believe that we should come back to Asimov, Isaac Asimov, with his laws of robotics, but rewrite them for education. And they don't have to be strictly logical. For example, learning for life, not life for learning, and lifelong learning, the machine interprets it that way. You should learn all the time, all your life. And if it's the goal, it can be dangerous. Well, everything can take time, even if A then B. And the time is not a part of the machine. It's discrete. Well, and who knows what is 10, 10, 10? Well, it's not the ultimate question. By the way, who knows that that answer gets the cookies?
Yeah. Who knows what it is? No?
Yeah. 10101.
Any answers to this question? Who knows? 10101? No?
Thank you. We will wait for the
Google it. The first
joint discussion. I believe there will be a lot of questions regarding this slide. So I have to move there. Yes, yes. It's better if you. So our next speaker is Kamila Eschner Restrepo. I hope I pronounced it correctly. And Kamila,
it's so much better than the way I pronounce names here. So. No.
You are from the University of Universidad de Los Andes.
Yes. So, hello everyone. Thank you for being here. And thanks for my fellow sharers of table. I would like to start by thanking the organizers of this event for bringing us together and giving me an excuse to finally see Belgrade, which had been on my bucket list for a while. And so I'd like to begin by saying that I'm not a scholar of education or pedagogy. My background is in history and cultural studies. And I realized that it might seem disrespectful to just assume I can show up here to talk about classroom practices just because I'm a professor. So I apologize in advance for the lack of technical and specialized knowledge in this area. But what I do and have done for a while is what I have roughly labeled as practicing utopia, which is what's in the title of my abstract that I sent, in the classroom in different settings, and that I will like to address here. So as a professor of theater and performance studies and Latin American critical and decolonial thought, and in general of cultural studies, I have made it a priority to break some of the rigidity of academia in the name of bringing creation through research to the classroom. So my training in performance and theater studies, I have training in theater, but I also have training in performance studies and scenography. So this is why I got into artistic research or research creation, and that's what I want to bring into the classroom. And I realized a few minutes ago before sitting up here that maybe when I say decolonial, it's read as post-colonial. So I should like make the difference that decolonial thought is a specific school of thought in Latin America, different from post-colonial thought. So post-colonial thought comes mostly from post-structuralist theory and North African and Southeast Asian scholars who work post-independence on how to rebuild the pre-colonial past. In the case of decolonial thought, it's a genealogical project of trying to find decolonial thought in the very colonial period. So we can talk about it later, but this is why I think this difference matters in terms of how do we conceive of this project as utopian as well. Taking students out of their comfort zones, which can be pretty confrontational, because I teach social science students, right? And pushing them to create. And here, this is my first approach to utopia's practice. In this paper, I plan on discussing the role of utopian thinking in the classroom as a catalyst in the process of further research and learning, but also in creating engaged and critical citizenship. And this is where my reflection is getting to. This is all kind of new. Despite all that has been said about radical shifts in education tending towards increased remoteness, I don't know if you're in your universities, but in mine, it's like the big thing. In this growingly post-human world, we humans yearn for connection. And one way to do so is through utopian thinking. I plan on presenting a few cases where encouraging creative thinking and expression has successfully enabled the opening of new reflective spaces in my classrooms. So I have this, right? Okay, so I'd like to begin by reflecting on the title of the conference, Why Still Education, and the quality of stillness. Probably because I'm ESL person, so I like to think about words in English and what they mean and why does it have so many meanings when English is such a synthetic language. It has specific words for everything, but not this. So the Oxford English Dictionary defines stillness as the quality of being quiet and not moving. So still education from this standpoint is an oxymoron. Since how can we conceive of education as quiet or not moving? Isn't the very essence of education to be moving, right? Both in a linear spatial perspective of moving towards a goal, but also moving as in shaking and causing deep feelings in someone. And we've all talked about this one way or another in the past few days. Teachers should always be on the move while moving and imprinting something, right, in our students. So the pandemic came along, and I think most of us would agree on the lack of movement it brought about. Not only were we restless in confinement, looking up YouTube videos and tutorials and channels, trying out new physical disciplines such as yoga, Pilates, kickboxing, HIIT, Tabata, just to name a few of those I fell prey to. But also, education became still too. The lack of the usual movement in, to, and from classes caused severe pain in our backs, necks, hips, heads, and hearts. And because I do performance stuff, I kept thinking, so from a scholarly perspective, we're constantly thinking about bodies, but we never actually like talk about our bodily existences in education. And so I started doing like little rituals with my students, such as starting class with stretching on Zoom. And every time someone had to propose a physical activity, and so on. And somehow we realized that nothing much was going to happen in the academic space. Colleges and universities all around the globe changed requirements and standards, lowered expectations, realized that when survival is at stake, maybe education stops being a priority. So why still education? Most of us questioned ourselves while taking sometimes heroic, sometimes cynical approaches to our jobs and their meaning. At the same time, those jobs, the inertia of the education system, the certainty for many of us, at least, that our jobs at least were secure, that while these kids needed a degree, we still were needed, and that moving to fully virtual would keep us safe from contagion, brought a much needed stillness to our lives in the midst of so much movement and change. Still education, our little refugee while the world was falling apart. So between these three different and perhaps even contradictory approaches to stillness, we're all here to reflect on our own teaching and learning practices, fighting stillness, and also bringing it about. But why do I still believe in education, right? So for the past 2 years, more or less, I started a new research project on posthumanism, and I've been thinking about utopia and dystopia. And all of this happened in the midst of this pandemic. So this is why all of this reflection of stillness is deeply embedded in what I'm doing, because I never expected that I wouldn't be able to do the research I was planning to, the research I got funding to do. And so I had to do it in my stillness, right? So in January of 2020, I began teaching a course called Dystopias. The course explored reading, stories, films, news, and other material roughly centered around the dystopic and the monstrous. So little did I or my students know that some of the worst nightmares that we were supposed to discuss from an academic point of view would become true over the following months. And it was eerie how things happened. They were expected to present some form of dystopian imaginary creation as their final assignment for their course. Between literary works, video games, role games, video blogs, and fanzines, they took on the task of imagining worst-case scenarios. And not always they were worst-case scenarios. I have some examples to show to you later of what came about. So that semester began like any other, until our lives changed for good. So I remember it was a Thursday evening when we were finishing class and were told we would not be coming back the next day or for the next 2 weeks. And so my students got super anxious, and I was like, no, we'll see each other in 2 weeks, of course. Yeah, 2 years later. While we were at it, there were different ways of thinking about the human, the anti-human, and the post-human. The projects were presented shortly before the world shut down. So this is also very significant, because some of the projects actually had to change or shift or just like deepen during the rest of the semester. Some of them were funny and unbelievable at the time. Some of the students changed their perspectives completely after the shutdown and started reflecting on their daily lives. Like one of them actually made a log of being locked down and like everything that became annoying to her, because remember how annoying noises were and like smells, and all of a sudden our houses were like noisy and things like that. And we also shared news and fears, and we even had a dream log that we were writing our dreams on there, and then starting the class with sharing some of that as well. And the readings also changed. So we ended up reading some contributions from Sopa de Juan, which was a digital volume which was speed published in Spanish and contained most contributions from Latin American thinkers, mixed in with a few of those early pandemic reflections from Agamben. Remember, for instance, that there was like an essay every 3 days or so. The Hemispheric Institute of Performance and Politics published a trilingual volume called Contactos, where they invited performance scholars and artists to write about confinement and the arts. André Lepecki, who is a Brazilian scholar of performance studies, wrote this beautiful essay called Movement in the Pause, about how dancers, actors, people whose life is to move, could connect and keep working during the pandemic. Rebecca Solnit's piece in the Guardian, The Impossible Has Already Happened, What Coronavirus Can Teach Us About Hope. I'm not sure if you've read it, but it was a big light in the darkness, and her appeal to hope was heartwarming. People began to die, famous people, close people, faraway people. And so I really enjoyed your presentation, because part of what we ended up doing was that, we looked at many nature is healing memes together, right? So collective humor was a refugee from our own isolation, a kind of utopian space. We had the feeling that we were closer than ever, that we were together in something bigger than ourselves, and that gave us comfort. So I'm going to share with you some of the products. I don't know if I will have to go there, because some of them are websites, and everything is in Spanish, so I will just try to tell you what is there, but just so that you can see the formats that it came into. Okay, so this project, this was Angie's project. I requested their permission to share this with you today. So this was a worst case scenario of the virus. That's why it's the more slow version of it. So if you move through the tabs, what she did was basically play on the theory that the virus was created and it was an accident that happened in a laboratory or something, and that it had escaped. So this pharmaceutical company, and this is March of 2020. So this pharmaceutical company found a cure, but the cure was limited to only some selected citizens. And so they started applying it, and then she only got to the part where the citizens were starting to find out the side effects of the cure and what they would have to live with going forward. But what I found most fascinating about reading it now, going back to this website, is that she also envisioned the end of the pandemic as a day where the government, so there were lockdowns and of course the rise of totalitarianism everywhere. And so the end of the pandemic was when the governments decided that it was over, but people were still dying, but they were not going to talk about it anymore, in case it sounds familiar. And so that was it. So no one was allowed to talk about the virus anymore. So this is one of the examples. Can we move to the next one? I don't know if this works anymore when we are yeah. So and this was the slogan. This is that project. So this was the slogan of the new country while they were in the crisis, for a prosperous and clean country. Okay, so this is, sorry. Yeah, you should. Oh, but we can click, right? Yeah. Yes, because maybe it wasn't allowed.
Yeah, just go to YouTube.
I can't. Should I go? Okay, so Claudia.
Click on the link.
Yes.
Okay, so Claudia did, okay, oh, but it didn't open, it doesn't matter. So it's an video series called the Posthuman Manifesto, and it has like houses. She was working on horoscope and that kind of imaginary. So this is the third house, which is the shortest one, and it's the reason why I chose to show it, because otherwise it's too long, but no. Play, yes. So I don't take up too much time. So what Claudia did, this is, they don't have titles, they only have the numbers. So this is the third house, and this is everything that's kind of man-made culture arts. There's also one that relates to like, nature, another one to babies, another one to aging. So there were these 8 houses, part of this post-human manifesto that she made. Yeah, but I have some more things, yes. That's why I'm measuring. Thank you. Okay. So I have one more that I wanted to show you. This is also a link. Sorry. So this is a diary of a serial killer. I bring all these different things also. Oh, okay.
The link is to the local resource.
Excuse me?
The link is to the local resource.
Is it? Okay. Yeah. Well, so that one is a diary of a serial killer. And this is this woman trying to recreate the thoughts of this person who lives that diary, basically. And I wanted to show some parts of it, but it doesn't matter. And then another one is called Letters to My Mother. Which is about a man mourning his mother, writes letters to her, and he decides to stop attending therapy and gets closure by killing his best friend's mother. So, you know, in summary. Then there was another one who made a chat with a stalker, and these 3 I find very interesting because they were attempts to recreate the monster and like embody the monster from the monster's perspective. These are narratives in the first person. And then this one I don't show to you because then I realized it's suspiciously similar to an existing video game. But this guy like took the interface and made it about, it was a video game where you had to pass through customs in any border. And so, of course, you were denied entrance into that country. And so there were different characters that you could play. You could be a refugee alone, or you could have a family, or you could actually be a criminal. But it was playing with those fears, of course. And the reason why I show these very different examples is to also show you the variety of what the monstrous and the dystopic sparked in students, especially in that context, right? So not everything was about the pandemic, for better or worse. Okay, so I'm closing now. Over the past few years, I have been reflecting on the importance of utopian thinking in and out of the classroom, both as a survival strategy, but also as a strong pedagogical tool that empowers students and enables them to think creatively while encouraging them to make things happen and use alternative non-academic languages and modes of knowledge in the classroom. And of course, this looks smooth when I show the results, but it's kind of a nightmare in itself. Like, yeah, you can do anything, but really anything. Yeah, you can do anything. So while they get there, it's a whole process in itself. If decoloniality is in itself a utopia, then we must create a space for it to exist through challenging not only the contents, but also the forms of expression of canonical language. And this is why I kept asking questions about language, right? We use our imaginations, but also our senses and our physical bodies to enact different realities. Moreover, truly engaged learning is in itself a utopia. So from the fascination of the online world to the sickness of Zoom conferences and spiritist seances of the kind of, can anyone see me? Can anyone hear me? So the human, the monster, what does the monstrous mean in education? And what could possibly be the place for it? And this is some part of that, right? In the end, I thought it would be easier to tell utopias from dystopias. In the midst of the pandemic, a huge social revolt broke up in Colombia. I don't think there are many news that get here from there. Between the doubly dystopian scenario of protest being severely repressed by the police and the still ongoing pandemic, students ended up begging for a space for the world to come into the classroom. So we decided to change the final assignment and design proposals for the future. But this is a different experience. Dystopia became our own way of building our utopia. Dystopia brought us together in a space that only we understood, that every Thursday evening would keep us long past the scheduled end of the class to talk about our fears and being there. And the seminar was already 3 hours long, and sometimes it went for 4 hours. So we were like there and present and together, and this gave us some sense of home and relief. Utopian thinking and critical thinking go hand in hand, because where else do we start to change the world? But it's also harder. It takes creativity, risk-taking, planning, and rigor. And in the meantime, I'm still educating myself in stillness. So thank you very much. I think that's...
Thanks, Camila, and I'm opening the discussion. So let's hear some questions and comments.
Do I move back there? I don't understand the choreography of this.
Okay, thank you all of you for these great presentations. It was inspiring. My question is for Camila. You said that it was very tiring at the moment and you need to do, I don't know, lots of things to maintain your course with the students. But maybe you can tell us what was the most challenging thing with your work with children, so with students in your course called Dystopias.
The hardest
challenges, or I don't know what you want to call it.
I'm trying to think of tops. I think the hardest was, I think we all went through this, and it could have happened regardless of the topic. But at some point, we all lost the motivation. And so, motivation being a weird concept in education, as in an excuse for, I'm not motivated, I'm not doing anything. But at the same time being the driver of that motivation and not feeling it myself either. So I think maybe that, and in the end, trying to work through that, and how that lack of motivation is in itself maybe a creative force. And for some it was, one of them was working on laziness. So she made a laziness log. And I was like, well, thank you. So none of us want to come out from bed, and you're actually doing it. And writing about being in bed all day and not taking a shower or anything. So that, I think that was the hardest part. And not just then, you know, all through this time. And even now, I don't know if you experienced this, but coming back it's just not the same. So yeah.
Do you have that course when you are now on live?
No, it's a special course that I can. It's called the advanced seminar. So it's pretty much anything goes, whatever a professor proposes. And I haven't been given the right to give the special seminar ever since. But yeah, I don't know what will happen next time. I will try and then get back to you. Thank you.
Now I would like to give some kind of comment. I was thinking about how actually we can connect the three of your lectures by discussing or asking about the role of the teacher, because you talked about your very human experience of teaching, while Kay mentioned the non-human, more than human teachers, which are actually, it made me wonder about you're actually changing the very concept of teacher by using it in this way, because we usually think of teachers as doing teaching intentionally. So maybe you could comment on this, and your lecture, in your lecture you actually stressed that machines are not teachers, because they do not have, if they have intentions at all, these intentions are not directed at this general, the way I understood, this general well-being and care for humans. So, okay, so would any of you, Kay, maybe you first like to comment on this?
Yeah, that's a great comment. And I think there's something about intentionality when we talk about teaching, as you say, and the idea that there's some, whether it's human or non-human or whatever, that the language suggests intent to teach. And obviously, if you're going out and thinking about the natural world, it's more about learning. So I think there's something interesting about the language there. I did use the word educator more, so more than human educators. And I think it's one of those things where perhaps there isn't quite the language, or maybe English is very limiting, I always find. There's probably better words for this somewhere that would capture the meaning. But I think the people that I was working with, because they were teachers, it was a bit of an inroad for them to say, actually, yes, I understand what teaching is, and now I'm going to see it in a slightly different way, if that makes sense.
Well, and the question was for us too, right? So we fundamentally, when we are dealing with the machine, like either it's a smartphone or something, do we want that or not? We objectify it, like we subjectify it. So we make it like like we're dealing with a person, because this is our nature, to deal with somebody we see as a person or as a, I don't know, individual. But we forget that this is, mostly algorithms, and they are working the way they are set. They don't, their goal for learning is, the program is decompose it into steps, and that's all represented in 0 ones and figures and some parameters. But when you have that augmented, when you have that augmented reality around you, and when you have that, machine-based tasks, you tend to forget. You tend to think that there's something close to a teacher, something close to educator on the other side. Maybe you can add.
Well, basically, we have a process which is kind of our perception plays some games, like pareidolia. There is like psychological that perception bug basically which makes humans see faces everywhere. Yeah, it's called pareidolia. For example, when you look at the picture with, I think it was Archimboldi who was painting pictures like portraits of different objects. Lawyer and something else, lawyer made of books. So when we use technology, we see this face. This kind of technology looks to us, it's our perception. And what we have now is also deceiving us.
Even when we think of robotics, we see, like, you know, the human-shaped robot or something. That's our, like, mostly our first association, but that's not. So that can be completely not individual. That can be completely the process that that has nothing to do with the human shape, or either of mind or of body. Yeah. By the way, does anybody know the answer yet? No? Yeah, there's a chance. There's a chance to get the cookie still.
Natasha.
Thank you. Thank you. That was really engaging, and I really enjoyed the diversity of perspectives, because I think this is one of the qualities or strengths of this conference, because we hear even like kind of divergent thinking and opinions, which I think is important. So one question for all of you is that when I listened to the examples, it reminded me of the area of speculative narratives and speculative fiction and kind of speculative design. And I'm aware of that because I'm part of Futures Thinking group at Lancaster. So to what extent, you know, you build on those perspectives, and, you know, whether you actually started from that. I mean, you mentioned that, Camilla, you know, those narratives, which would be understood, you know, by some people as kind of speculative narrative, speculative fiction approaches, kind of futuristic methods for reflection. And I mean, the same question for you, because you also gave very interesting scenarios. And I think another question I have is also for the two of you, because I think you brought the question of dehumanization to the questions of humanization, posthumanization, and kind of transhumanism, anti-humanism, etc. So my question would be, so how does the dehumanization relate to posthumanism or transhumanism? Okay, thank you.
No, it's the question to us.
Yes, the first question is actually for everybody, so maybe.
Okay. Okay, sorry, I was writing it all down. So in the beginning of that course, what I wanted to, so I got into this through passion for science fiction literature, and so in the past few years I have been reading up everything that I can find of Latin American science fiction. Mm-hmm. And some of the things that I found is that there are very universal tropes: technology, destruction of the environment, and so on, right? But then there are also very specific ones. So the starting point in that moment, and the starting point for me to get there, has to do with the fact that every image of the future is a projection of the present, right? Either hopes or fears or whatever. So I think if that got your question right, so that's how I get into that. So this speculative fiction, that's basically my entrance into it.
Thank you. So you did use actually speculative fiction as the starting point.
Yes, but not only the fiction. So this is, it's very mixed up.
Yes.
So some of the things that we originally were supposed, and we actually did read, because then everything changed, right? I lost control of that course, or gave up control of that course, whichever way you prefer to see it. But one of the things that we were reading were, for instance, the imaginaries of the monstrous from Spaniards in the 15th century in the Americas. So cannibals and men with the feet looking to, you know, like all of these kinds of monsters that are part of colonial imagination. So it comes from many different places. I mean, it kind of is science fiction, but it's not, right? Those people actually did see those cannibals, those witches, those ghosts. So yes, it's a little bit of everything.
Yes, thank you. And I think you just, in a way, nailed it by mentioning kind of decolonial perspective, because I think there are a lot of perspectives that are similar or share certain ideas or philosophies with, you know, more maybe Western or colonial perspectives. And I think it's very important to actually make those visible and voiced. So, so this is something that you have just done.
Yeah,
so
thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm obsessed with those images of alterity, right? What the other looks like. What does the other do when we're not looking at him? So, yeah. Thank you.
I'll just say something quickly then about, and it's more around the kind of creative process. And we took on board very much, Rosie mentioned it, this idea of acting as if and thinking about what if and all of those kind of things. And then creativity, I think, had to be at the heart of the project, because what I didn't really want was us to go to the Yorkshire Dales and just be talking and for it to be discursive particularly. I felt that it needed an artistic leap a little bit. Not that I'm an artist, I always dabble in these things, you know, without being any good at it. But so things like Art Brut was really important, and it was very much about the raw creativity. It wasn't about the aesthetic, although things were beautiful, actually. It was very much about just the creation for itself and in itself, in order to start kind of reimagining. And we worked with it's that idea of kind of conceptual personae. So we had some conceptual ideas that we worked with during the weekend, one of which was the Deleuze and Guattari cosmic artisan. So that idea about being rooted, but also being connected. And again, that very much about, raw creativity.
Thank you, and great that you mentioned the cosmic artisan. I was waiting for it.
Okay, about first question. Well, how we came up with the scenarios? For more than 10 years, actually, I'm trying to use the topic of scenarios in my courses with students. We begin practically every course with smaller scenarios and growing them to utopias or dystopias, which is quite interesting. And of course, this was influenced a lot by the cyberpunk genre, which actually was one of the important for the computer science field. And when a literature genre becomes a professional field, that is quite interesting. I mean, when stories turn into practice, and the whole science fiction, of course, is important in this case. For example, one of the scenarios, the second one, and the topic of utility maximization, actually it has a lot in common with Steven Silverberg's story about a family who bought a robot and programmed it to help them lose weight. Well, you can imagine what happens in the end. And it's 1960s, I think. So it's quite an old story. Scenarios are now a professional field for guys in computer security. It's just the tool. Not utilizing them, they cannot build that that perspective. It's impossible to predict humans right now, but it's possible to prepare and train people who have to be ready for anything virtually. Second.
Can I maybe start on the second question and you can add? So I think that there is still a problem linguistically with those prefixes like post, trans, D. Yeah, so because there's still, you know, not that clear in all cases clear definition of those. Sometimes it's seen as a process, sometimes it's seen as a state. Well, so also not that clear. Well, for me personally, post is something that would say more than a human plus the environment, and human as a like the part of the environment that is not on the top of it. Trans means something that is like embedded. So I would say there's a new quality merging things together. And D, well, it's something losing, right? So the human losing something too. So that's more of negative aspect of that. Maybe you can elaborate.
Well, why dehumanization? Because the education machine, potentially, it's the threat to not to education, it's the threat to human being as a learning subject, learning agent, and well, the idea of losing these features, which can be really important for a human, but are invisible to the machine. It is something that right now is growing bigger, because we are constantly not even tracked. We just sell our data, we distribute our data, and it produces the wrong model. Mm-hmm. The model which is used for decision making, for management, for economical purposes, it just leaves humans somewhere else. I hope I answered you.
Yes, definitely. And I just wanted to hear, further interpretations, but I was thinking that would be along those lines, because I think it's very important to think about, okay, so, gains and losses, what is lost and what is gained, and somewhere in between these two. So I think you were raising these questions. So the loss of something human, which is then problematized through the educational machine.
Can I just add a little comment here? Because when we are dealing, for example, with medical data, with system of healthcare and collecting something about our vital parameters, about our bodies, it's just one part. The educational data can be much more sophisticated in terms of management, in terms of pushing people towards particular direction. And that's why right now we are we are in the process of that revolution in educational management. You see that the technologies, they really empower managers, not teachers. We have some minor changes, which is actually COVID demonstrated how it goes. For teachers, it's just the tools. For managers, it's the huge thing. It's the transformation. For bureaucracy, not for teachers.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? Oh, over there.
Thank you. Hi everyone, my name is Jelena. I work for the Center for the Promotion of Science, and I have a question for Kate. I was unfortunately late, so I didn't hear the very beginning of your talk, so sorry if you already explained that. I'm curious with these methodologies of walking, and also Carol was talking that yesterday, and I always struggle with facilitation, as you said, how much of our intervention is okay, and how do we describe that in our research, our position, our influence? So I would just like to hear more about how you dealt with this. And also, you said non-human teachers. As I saw, but the live teachers, you were not considering unalive objects or unalive entities. Yeah. So like this small question, but the first one is like more important.
Yeah. Just to answer the second point first then. So yes, we were quite, I wanted to be, as you say, it's always a tension. I wanted to be quite open about it and very unprescribing. And that's really hard because, as I said, you always have predictions in your mind. You can't stop thinking where it might go. And you're also constrained. I had, a small research grant. So I also was tied into having to have some kind of outcome. So there was always that in the mix, which was difficult. But in terms of kind of people thinking about what they learn from other than humans, it really interested me that people didn't go straight for sheep. So there was a load of sheep, and I thought people are going to talk about the sheep. They weren't interested in the sheep at all. They like the lambs, the baby ones. But the things like the dry stone walls, were people really interested in that and thinking about boundaries, and then bringing in a bit of a kind of critical lens, thinking about the landscape and how boundaried the landscape was. And then, as I mentioned, one of the participants' relationship with the bench in the garden and what that kind of produced, I think, in him, that was really interesting. So it was much more open than I anticipated in that sense. And in terms of the method, I wanted to draw on, it's actually Aaron Kunt's work around walking interviews. So when we did a lot of walking during the weekend anyway, and then as the kind of formal research element, we did some walking interviews together. So it's that idea that what thoughts might emerge when you're not seated and in that traditional, very restrictive kind of research paradigm where you're sitting and looking at each other and talking. So that idea of the kind of engaged encounter, and how your thoughts might wander as you're physically wandering, and what that might do. So it was really interesting, and I think it becomes an event then, doesn't it? So it's more viewing the interview as a kind of event and seeing what's produced out of that. And again, thinking about the kind of non-human elements of that, my thoughts were, yes, it might be windy. It was April, it was very cold actually, it snowed while we were there, so we had some interesting things going on in terms of kind of weather and climate. But also non-humans, tractors, and kind of all that other kind of noise, other people. So all kinds of things that sort of interrupted and distracted. And then we reflected on that interview process afterwards. So kind of it wasn't just about the conversations that we had and what we discussed about the projects, but also the process of thinking it through together afterwards. So what was happening for you here when you said this, and what did that distraction perhaps bring about that might not have happened. So there was a kind of meta-reflective level as well. So yeah, quite a lot going on.
Thank you. Any more questions? Well, okay, then I see that the lunch is waiting.
Okay,
so
anybody